She was the kind of actress who could fill a room without ever raising her voice. A legend from the golden years of Hollywood. Radiant, fearless, and unforgettable. But in the still hours before dawn, that light quietly faded. At 1:50 a.m., Sally Kirkland, the Oscar-nominated actress whose passion once set stages ablaze, took her final breath. It happened just days after she entered hospice care, a final act no one wanted to believe was coming. Fans across the world woke up to the news in disbelief, their timelines flooded with tributes, memories, and heartbreak. For Hollywood, it wasn't just the loss of a star, it was the end of an era that defined authenticity and courage. Because behind the red carpets, behind the glitter and applause, was a woman who had weathered storms few ever saw. Broken bones, bad advice, betrayal from the very system she gave her life to. And yet, until the very end, she fought with the same quiet dignity that made her unforgettable. But this wasn't just a story about an actress dying. It was the final chapter of a woman who refused to give up her light, even as the curtain slowly fell. When the news broke, it didn't come from a gossip site or a tabloid headline. It came from her longtime representative, Michael Green, a man who had stood by her through decades of triumphs and trials. His voice, heavy with emotion, confirmed what everyone had feared. Sally Kirkland had passed away at 1:50 a.m. PST. He said she would be deeply missed. Those two words carried the weight of a lifetime. Just days earlier, her friends had shared a final update on her GoFundMe page. One last note from a woman who had given her entire heart to the world. Sally is on hospice now and resting comfortably, the message read. Please hold and send the light for Sally. It was gentle, hopeful, almost peaceful, as if she was whispering her last thank you to everyone who had ever loved her. No one could have imagined that only a few days later, that light would go out. Her loved ones said she was calm, surrounded by care, and still grateful, even when her body had already begun to let go. The contrast was almost too much to bear, from gratitude and light to silence and loss. But no one knew how close the end really was. The decline didn't happen overnight. It began quietly, with one devastating fall in her own home. A simple slip in the shower left Sally with fractures in 4 bones in her neck, a broken wrist, and a shattered hip. For most people, injuries like that are painful. For someone in their 80s, they can be life-altering. She tried to stay strong, smiling through the pain, telling friends she'd bounce back soon. But the road ahead would be longer and crueler than anyone expected. The injuries led to 2 life-threatening infections. Each hospitalization drained more than just her body. It drained her finances and her spirit. Months turned into a year of rehab and recovery, but the medical bills didn't stop. Her insurance only covered the first 100 days, and after that, she was on her own. The woman who had once walked the red carpets of Hollywood suddenly found herself struggling to afford the care she needed to survive. Friends later revealed that Sally had received what they called bad advice from her financial manager, advice that left her bank accounts nearly empty and her future uncertain. It was a betrayal that cut deep. How could someone who'd worked for decades, starred in over 200 films, and earned an Oscar nomination be left so vulnerable? And then came another blow. In 2021, the Screen Actors Guild dropped supplemental insurance for members over 65. Overnight, veterans like Sally lost critical coverage, left to fight the system that once celebrated them. But what broke hearts wasn't just her body. It was how Hollywood seemed to forget one of its own. When Hollywood turned its back, the people who had loved Sally the most, her fans, stepped forward. A GoFundMe page went live, quietly at first, with a few $100s trickling in. But within weeks, it became something much bigger. A movement of gratitude and memory. People who hadn't heard her name in years suddenly remembered how her films had made them feel. They remembered Anna, the movie that made them cry. They remembered her voice, her energy, her humanity. and they wanted to give something back. More than $60,000 was raised by strangers who had never met her, but felt like they had. The messages poured in. "You inspired me to act. You taught me to be brave. You made me believe it's never too late." Every comment was a reminder that fame fades, but impact doesn't. Her closest friends, many of them retired actors, artists, and fellow dreamers, fought quietly behind the scenes to keep her comfortable. They called doctors, handled paperwork, managed her care, and made sure she wasn't alone. To them, it wasn't charity, it was repayment. For every time she'd lifted someone up, for every young performer she'd mentored, this was their turn to return the light. It was bittersweet, seeing the world rediscover her only in her most fragile moments. But for those who knew Sally, it wasn't about pity. It was about love, loyalty, and legacy. The fans gave what Hollywood forgot: dignity. Yet behind the donations was a story of a woman who once stood at the very top of her craft. Long before her name was printed on movie posters, Sally Kirkland was just a bold, curious girl from New York City, born into a world of art, fashion, and fearlessness. Her mother, Sally Kirkland Sr., was a fashion editor for Vogue, a woman who understood beauty and presentation like few others. Her father, Frederick, worked as a metals dealer, grounded and practical, a contrast to the whirlwind creativity of her mother's circle. That duality, glamour and grit, would shape everything Sally became. By the 1960s, New York was the heart of artistic rebellion, and Sally dove right into it. It was Andy Warhol himself who first recognized her spark, calling her one of the 13 most beautiful women in 1964. Not just for her looks, but for the raw confidence that radiated from her. She wasn't afraid to shock, to challenge, or to bare herself, both emotionally and literally, in the name of art. In 1968, she did what no actress before her had dared. She appeared completely in the buff in the off-Broadway play Sweet Eros. It wasn't a gimmick. It was a statement, an act of liberation in a time when women in Hollywood were expected to play it safe. That moment made her infamous and unforgettable all at once. Critics were divided, but audiences couldn't look away. She was no longer just an actress. She was a revolution, wrapped in vulnerability. From there, Sally built a reputation as a performer who didn't follow rules. She rewrote them. Every role she touched felt alive, unpredictable, dangerous. She wasn't playing characters. She was living them. That fearless streak would earn her both applause and alienation. For Sally Kirkland, everything changed in 1987. After years of grinding through offbeat roles and overlooked performances, she found the character that would define her. Anna. A story about an aging Czech actress struggling to find relevance in a foreign land, Anna felt almost autobiographical. Sally didn't just play the role. She poured her soul into it. Every line, every expression, every tear came from someplace real. A lifetime of ambition, heartbreak, and survival in an industry that rarely forgives aging women. Critics called her performance raw, unflinching, and achingly real. It was the kind of portrayal that reminded audiences what acting was meant to be: truth disguised as art. That same year, she won the Golden Globe for Best Actress and earned an Academy Award nomination. For a brief, shimmering moment, the world finally saw what she had always known, that her talent was undeniable. But Sally wasn't one to stop at trophies. Over the years, she would amass more than 200 credits across film and television, slipping effortlessly from gritty dramas to big-budget hits. She appeared in Bruce Almighty, Charlie's Angels, and dozens of independent projects that gave her the creative freedom she craved. Directors described her as fearless, unpredictable, and impossible to forget once the camera started rolling. Yet, as the cameras faded and the years went on, the industry that once celebrated her began to move on to newer faces, younger names. And while Sally kept working, teaching, mentoring, inspiring, the world often overlooked the woman who had once broken every mold. But behind every spotlight, Sally carried the scars of struggle. Away from the bright lights and cameras, Sally Kirkland's life took on a quieter, deeper meaning. In her later years, she turned toward spirituality, not as an escape from Hollywood, but as a way to heal from it. She became an ordained minister, guiding others through life's chaos with the same empathy and fire she brought to her performances. She taught yoga, led meditation circles, and believed in something most of Hollywood had long forgotten: the power of presence, kindness, and stillness. Even as her own body began to fail, her spirit never did. She was known to take phone calls from struggling actors, artists, or friends who had lost their way. She'd listen, she'd laugh, she'd tell them to breathe, and she'd remind them that fame meant nothing without peace. Many of those who came to her for guidance would later say she changed their lives, not by giving them answers, but by helping them find their own. Barbra Streisand once called her a woman of wild courage. Liza Minnelli credited Sally for encouraging her to take bold risks in her own craft. To them, and to countless others, she wasn't just an actress, she was a mentor, a spiritual compass in an industry built on illusion. And even as she faced her own storms, the injuries, the pain, the fading spotlight, she gave everything she had left to help others shine. Her home, once filled with scripts and posters, became a sanctuary of incense, music, and calm, a reflection of the peace she spent her life seeking. And in her quiet wisdom, she became something far greater than a star. She became a guide. When the final chapter of Sally Kirkland's life closed, she didn't leave behind wealth or grand estates. She left behind something far more powerful: people who loved her, her godson, her 3 cousins, and the circle of loyal friends who stood by her through every rise and fall now carry the memory of a woman who lived without fear and gave without hesitation. They say she faced her final days with grace, whispering her thanks to those who cared for her, still saying, "I love you," even when the words came out faint. Her message had always been simple: keep your heart open, even when the world shuts its doors. And she did. Through decades of rejection, injury, and heartbreak, she never lost her belief in humanity. Gratitude became her final language, even when pain was her constant companion. As the news of her passing spread, tributes poured in across social media. Actors, filmmakers, and fans who grew up watching her shared clips, stories, and words of admiration. Some recalled her fiery performances. Others remembered her kindness between takes. One fan wrote, "She didn't just act, she lived every role." Another said, "Hollywood forgot her, but we never did." For the people who truly knew her, and even for those who only knew her through the screen, Sally Kirkland's legacy is one of resilience. She showed the world that art isn't about fame or fortune. It's about truth, courage, and connection. Her journey began in the spotlight, but ended in serenity, a fitting close for a life lived with such fierce purpose. Her light may have dimmed, but her fire, her courage, remains etched in Hollywood history.